April 18th, 1775, Paul Revere rode from Boston to Lexington to warn of the arrival of British soldiers. He started this ride at a small tavern on Union Street. This tavern's name was the Green Dragon. The Green Dragon Tavern was not only the beginning place of Revere's famous ride, but also the birthplace of American freedom. On this podcast, we will explore what it means to be American and how we can all be protectors of the American freedom our founding fathers fought for. Join us in our journey to rediscover what it means to be Americans.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Green Dragon Podcast. I'm your host, Aiden.
And your fellow host, Tom.
And your fellow host, Jake.
We're back another week. I feel like every week is every new week is a gift these days. You never know with everything going on in the news what's going to happen next. If we're going to be like part of China tomorrow and locked up in our apartments, or if the world's ended by Putin and nukes. So I'm happy to be here. I feel like we need to kick this new year off with some stories about awesome Americans. So today's going to be our first podcast about influential and amazing presidents. And so we figured we'd just get it started with George Washington, which I think will be really awesome today. So that'll be our main topic for the day. We'll discuss, who is George Washington, what made him different and special, and I'm really looking forward to that. I've been doing some research. I realized that I don't know that much about George Washington, or at least not as much as I thought I did. So it's been enlightening to say the least. So I'm excited about that. But to get started, we do have some in the news stuff I want to discuss. Stuff that's kind of current to this week. This week being, today being January 25th. And I believe it's tomorrow, guys. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the U.S. will reach its debt ceiling, meaning that we will not be in the position to borrow another penny of money by Thursday. Our debt's officially, it's been capped before. We've reached the debt ceiling before. They've just extended the ceiling, but we're getting to the point where I'm starting to wonder how much more leeway we're going to be getting. So it's a little nerve-wracking, to say the least, in the current state of the economy and country. I think it's a bit frightening to think about what would happen if all of a sudden everything kind of just falls apart, shuts down. Because really, if the lenders stop giving us money, stop giving the government money, I should say, and the government doesn't slow down the spending, we're really going to be in a bit of a predicament. I mean, we've been in a predicament for a while now, but it's the first time I've actually really paid attention to this a lot. I think it's just because it's the first time, at least in my life, that I've been old enough to really care about this type of stuff, where it's been this bad. Obviously, the national debt's been increasing for years. It's nothing new. But yeah, what do you guys think? I'm just curious to get your thoughts on this because I think it's got a lot of implications.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to look at it is to look at previous examples of when we've gotten close to the debt ceiling. The most recent being in 2011, when it was similar to the situation we're in now. So right now we actually have another 3 months, essentially, because the treasury can use what they call extraordinary measures, where they tap into like their last reserves and that will keep the government making their payments and keep us afloat until I believe it's 3 months out from now. So April will be the deadline. So tomorrow is the true debt ceiling threshold, but at the same time, they have other resources that they'll use. Again, those extraordinary measures, which will be implemented if no agreement is reached by then. So, but again, the most recent time it happened was 2011 during the Obama administration. And just getting close to it, close to the debt ceiling, we actually saw what ramifications could happen. The stock market tanked. The bond market also tanked because so the credit rating agencies, when they see that we're not reliably repaying our debt, they'll actually downgrade our debt, which will in turn raise the interest rates. And it didn't have too terrible of an effect last time, but last time we were at interest rates of between 1% and 2%. So right now, it's obviously a lot different with rates being, in some cases, 6-7 times that high, which is it's really an unprecedented situation in which, if that were to happen, could cause like an interest rate spiral, and then in turn could induce a recession even more quickly than we think. So from the financial aspect, that's where we sit. And yeah, it's just on a personal note, it's interesting that no one's really talking about cutting back on government spending. All it is planning to raise the debt ceiling. Both sides will do it, both sides of the political aisle. And there's no real conversation about scaling back what our government is spending, as opposed to just taking the easier route of raising the ceiling higher and higher until who knows what happens, which is the scary thing, because no one, not even the brightest financial minds on Wall Street, really actually know where that threshold is of when our public debt will get too high. So it's a dangerous game, raising the ceiling. It seems easy, and it seems like they can just print money out of nowhere, but eventually there will be a breaking point. It's not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Jake, but the reason the interest rates would go up in this case is just because, especially, or the bond market would crash too, is because U.S. debt, the U.S.'s debt is seen as one of the safest investments overall, right? Because
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I heard. I wasn't sure. Yeah.
It's essentially the linchpin of the whole global debt market. So if that were to crash or to become downgraded to a point where it's recognized as a risk, is risky.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, again, it will be unprecedented consequences that no one can even really quantify.
Yeah, if it's the linchpin, I mean, to put this for those of you who just want to give it to you in the simplest terms possible, your average debts, your credit card, your car loan, your mortgage, your student loan, all that's going to go up. Any debt you owe is going to, I mean, I don't know what you're thinking, Jake, but I'm guessing interest rates will probably, if this happens, if it's seen as an unsafe investment, which, like, how much more can you keep raising the debt ceiling before investors become, I mean, seriously, if I was an investor, if I invested in the U.S. debt market, I mean, I wouldn't be trusting it right now, seeing what the U.S. government's doing, especially dumping billions into Ukraine. I mean, it's almost like they're trying to just completely blow up the economy, because it's like a degenerate gambler or a degenerate alcoholic realizing that they're in a bad place, already in the degenerate gambler already in like 50K of debt and finding an extra, grand laying around and decides to go, bet it all instead of starting to pay back some of that debt. That's what it seems like anyway. So I just don't know how anybody can have any confidence in that. So how much longer are these investors really going to continue investing in this, or are they just going to pull out completely? And then if the US defaults on these debts, I mean, holy crap, it's going to be a mess.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's like if we're there right now we are seen as, again, the top rated debt in the world. But it has always been the critique of raising the debt ceiling is that if you just keep raising it, well then you're less likely to be trusted with how you spend your money.
No.
So yeah, again, I think that sentiment has probably been building around the world among the credit rating agencies who apply these ratings based on how risky they believe the debt of nations is. But yeah, it's again, can't stress enough how it's how ambiguous the future is and how dangerous that is for the markets as a whole and in turn the world.
I mean, the best case scenario here is we go through a recession.
Right.
The worst case scenario is the complete financial structure as we've known it for the last, let's say 80 years, 100 years, maybe, complete fallout. The US dollar probably, I'm guessing, I think that this will probably be the case first. I think the euro will go first. I think the euro is worthless after 2 years from now. I think the US dollar will probably be worthless in the next 2 to 3. I think we'll see a complete restructuring of currency, and not to throw any conspiracy theories out there, but it's interesting when you've got the World Economic Forum meeting with all the greatest minds, as they like to call it, in the world, and they're meeting and discussing the future of the world, and they can't figure out how to fix simple little problems like this. It almost seems like it's a planned, a calculated move to remove the structures that have been put in place to keep people like them in check.
Yeah, they're absolutely, I think, coming to the realization that it's not sustainable, the rate at which they're spending and handling their constituents' money. So yeah, they're now seeking out other ways of control, as we're seeing in the World Economic Forum. And I think that's part of the push too for globalization, is wanting to potentially consolidate. I don't know, it's kind of a conspiracy theory of mine that where they're pushing for like a one consolidated currency to be used, is kind of like the euro in Europe, but extend that to the whole world.
And I think along with that probably will come something like we're seeing in China, where there's some sort of social credit rating that will allow you to access your funds, and good people get to use their money and bad people don't get to use their money. And I think if I was somebody that wanted to control everything, my first step in doing it would be to completely destroy all the structures, including financial structures, that hold the world together. And what has held the world together for the last 100 years as far as financial structures, it's the US dollar. So if you're able to completely destroy what the US dollar and the US financial market means, then you pretty much have free reign over everybody else. The euro's not going to get in your way. Europe's pretty weak when it comes to their financial structure, as proven over the last 10 years. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I don't have a lot of hope for this. I don't know. If there's. Can you guys think of anything people can do to prepare themselves financially for this at all? Or I mean, we're not in the position to give financial advice, obviously, because we're not experts here. But what are you guys going to be doing in the next? Are you guys going to do anything to prepare for this at all? You need to go buy a bunch of gold.
Actually, I think I might buy more Bitcoin.
There you go.
Just because I don't know if you've seen it, but it's been rising pretty rapidly this past week. It's gone up 5,000 already. But I'll send this video to you guys. But so I'm about halfway through Atlas Shrugged right now, and it's right in the part where I don't know if you guys have read the book yet. I highly recommend it. It's really, really good. Like one of the best books I've ever read. But in this part, it's showing how the people on the top, like the politicians and the evil socialists, you could say, that harvest the money from people, and the capitalist society use it for their bad ends. So like Soros, I don't know, I feel like Bezos is becoming one of them, or a few others, but they essentially use the capitalist money system in order to take but not really give much value back to people. They steal a lot of information and things like that. I mean, a lot of big tech does that. So, anyway, in the story, they just declared that there can be no private property and that everyone has to pay the same amount in the economy they did the year before. So there can be no growth, no new ideas, no inventions, no patents, no copyrights, no nothing. It's like the only thing they can do is what they did in the last year. But the last year was the worst year ever in the economy. So they're pretty much just wanting to be in a stalemate so things don't get worse. It's really interesting because there's a conference and it had Michael Saylor and a few other Bitcoin educators, and they're talking about how Bitcoin is a way that people can be safe in crypto space because it's essentially the first private property we've ever actually had. Because the only way people can steal Bitcoin from you is through your own volition. Like if you say no, there's no way they can get it, which is really interesting because if you memorize your passkey in your mind, they can't access that Bitcoin. So it means that they actually have to negotiate with you on your terms if they wanted to steal from you. Where like the reason why the government can get so much money is they can print it on demand, which they're inflating, devaluing the dollar, and then by that they purchase things through the capitalist society on the lower grade, so then they can steal what funds we have for their own purposes. So if you took away the central bank and they couldn't print money, then you would see a dramatic decrease of government spending because they couldn't just print money to spend on things. So like the latest omnibus bill couldn't have gone through. It would have been really hard to finance the quote unquote war on terror. I don't know if you guys have been following that, but just how much bogus has been coming out and how they kind of tricked the whole US into that. But stuff like that, it's like if they actually gave the bill to each American for that war, it would have been 90 grand per person. But we didn't see it because they printed all that money. Or like all these bad trade deals they do, all this stuff. That's all of them just trying to control our livelihoods on their own. They don't work for it. That's the problem. They don't earn the money they use. When you don't earn the money you use, you have no responsibility for it. You have no rights for it because you don't claim a right for something you steal from others. You're a thief. So, that's kind of a roundabout way of explaining that Bitcoin is a way that people can actually own their own property because it's in a secured network. that's all run through a computer system that can't be hacked, as far as we know, for at least 10 years with the best technology they have now. But that would require 3 Earths worth of power now to hack the system because it's so strong. It's pretty incredible. And they just came out with the Lightning protocol, so now they can, I think currently they can do almost 12 million transactions per second, which is way faster than everything. So like credit cards, they settle 6 times a year. Bitcoin settles every 6 hours.
Wow, that's crazy.
So you have final settlement. Yeah, it's wild. You have final settlement of whose money is where every 6 hours, and it's done. You can't change it. So I would highly recommend people to start researching more and learn about Bitcoin. This isn't financial advice, except that I think everybody has their own responsibility to understand how money works. And I think we've definitely had a shroud put over our eyes of what the financial system is, because we were told to work all the time for this life. So you have a mortgage you have to pay your whole life, you have student debt you have to pay your whole life, you can never get out of debt really. You have to borrow money for cars, you have to borrow money for almost everything. And then once you finally pay it off, by the time you're 70 years old, they put you in a nursing home for the rest of your life. So you're not really free. This isn't really what free America is supposed to look like. Free America is supposed to be, you can work a job and you have the wealth to do whatever you want. I think we've slowly been shown that a good life is just doing what they tell us to do. And if we have food and water, we should be happy. Instead of realizing, no, those are the basic needs that everyone should have and everyone would have if it was a free economy. So I would highly recommend to look into Bitcoin, because from what I've understood and what I've been seeing and understanding economics, it's like the best financial system ever invented. So.
Yeah, I think because it's so focused on creating individual wealth, and it's so decentralized, it's definitely got all the markers of what you want to see in a currency or a wealth building tool, because it is limited. It's not like you can create any more Bitcoin, right, Tom? Is that correct? What's the total amount of Bitcoin available?
So it'll be 21 million Bitcoins.
21 million Bitcoins. Okay.
But by the time that is all finally mined, that'll be 130 years from now. But the cool thing is, so just a little bit, so there's 2 forms of understanding the economic structure. There's Keynesian, which we are under, which is fiat currency, and then there's Austrian. Keynesian economics say that you need inflation to stimulate the economy. So a little bit of inflation is good because it gives more money to people. But it's a lie, because money doesn't come from the printing press, it comes through trade. So all economy is one person makes something and they say, I made this, I'll exchange this with what this other person made, and we'll make a transaction, because I see what you have is more valuable, and what I have you see is more valuable than what you have. So make a trade, and now there's 2 things in the economy. Now they do that again, there's 4 things in the economy. They keep doing that, there's 6, 8, it's a multiplier. So every time someone trades with something and they make something, that's what creates wealth, by material objects that actually have a value to people. So when you have a currency or money is just a reflection of how much that's happening. So the right money is one that deflates because the purchasing power increases. So if you have $1 today, if it was actually becoming a stronger economy and the dollar stayed the same quote unquote quantity, the purchasing power of $1 today would be stronger in 10 days than it is today, because the economy is stronger. So what you could buy with $1 a day, you could actually buy more in 10 days. So that's what Bitcoin is. So each Bitcoin can be divided into 100 million different parts. So you can use however infinitesimal amount of Bitcoin to buy the product. So the purchasing power grows with Bitcoin, but you can divide it up as much as you need to buy the thing. Keep dividing it as the purchasing power increases to get more goods. So it's built on Austrian economics, which are technically true economics. It's not other stuff.
That's cool. We're gonna have to do a full we'll have to do a full podcast on this, because I feel like you could get like really deep into the weeds on this stuff, and I think it's fascinating because I think we're at the point where, and people might look at, I think a lot of people, especially older people, look at Bitcoin as this radical kind of unstable form of wealth building or economy building, and don't really trust it just because of its kind of. I think most people don't understand it, and that's why it's not trusted. It's kind of like snake oil to a lot of people. Like you're like I think a lot of people look at people that are into crypto like they're snake oil salesmen, and I think the problem is when you have things like scandals like FTX, bringing down a lot of faith and polluting the crypto space. I think most cryptos just it's want to be Bitcoin, right? And that's kind of the problem. So yeah, no, it is fascinating because it's controlled by the individual, and not a government, which or any certain group of people, which is pretty cool. And I think that's what needs to. I think you need something kind of radical like that, or what seems radical, to reverse where we're at currently with everything that's going on in the geopolitics and the world economy.
Yeah, Tom. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jake.
Oh, I was just going to say, I liked that you mentioned or made the comparison between the Austrian and Keynesian economics. And I think it's worth noting to kind of draw it back to the debt ceiling that the Keynesian economists, as you mentioned, believe that raising inflation is the way to bolster the economy and prop it up. And their method for doing so is an increase in government spending, which is exactly what we're doing now and why we're constantly getting so close to the debt ceiling or near it and having to constantly raise it, is that our government has adopted this view, this Keynesian view, in that essentially more spending is the way to solve all the problems in the economy, which, as you articulated so clearly, is just not the case.
Yeah, because if you think about it, like, this is really interesting. I listened to another talk this past week, and it was with Robert Breedlove, who's a really good Bitcoin educator and just understander of economics. He was saying that every time someone takes something from you and you don't have consent from it, that's technically theft. So every time the government takes even a smidge from us and we don't say that's okay, they're thieves, they're stealing from us. And if you actually look at how many taxes we pay and how much is stolen from us through inflation, it's insane. Like, the average inflation for the US dollar since 1971 has been 7% a year. So if you look at just like houses, so the reason why houses go up in money so much is because they're the only thing really. So the value of the home is still the same, but it's just you need more dollars to pay for the same thing. So like Michael Saylor, he was explaining that when he bought his home in Florida, They said in 1930 it was 100, or earlier. It was a pretty old home. It was like $100,000 at that time. Now it's estimated at the worth of $30 million. He says if you put it in the compounding of 7% interest or inflation, he said that works out to be that price. So he said that house 350x'd in dollar amount for the same house. So that explains like how much they steal from us, and then they try to say that it's for our own good. It's like saying, well, I'm going to take this from you because you don't know what to do with it, like Social Security, stuff like that. It's just a big scam. So it's all about them trying to say that we can't think on our own. That's their main premise. They're like, you don't know what to do with your money, so we'll do it for you. But they can't really make a good decision because I think we talked about this before. Like, if the smartest person doesn't understand 1% of reality, how can they tell you to run 99% of your reality?
Exactly. They're all fools, faking so they could take over. You can't trust any of them. And you know who didn't trust any of them? This is going to be my perfect segue into our main topic for tonight. You know who didn't trust any of them? George Washington. He was the first leader of the United States. You know what? He didn't even want to have a title. They thought, I think it was John Adams tried to make him give him the title of like king or something crazy like that, and he denied it and said, I'll just be called Mr. President, and that's good enough. But George Washington was like, if we could have a leader like George Washington now, oh my gosh, that would be fantastic. I don't think since we've had George Washington, I don't think we've had a president, or I would even venture to say, I don't think we've had a world leader, like a leader of a country like George Washington. And that's just because of his disdain for, he really didn't have he really didn't have any interest in being in charge. The only reason he agreed to be in charge is because he felt like he had a duty to his country, and he was asked to serve his country, and that's the only reason he did it. And when he was done serving his country, he just went back to his normal life. I think I listened to this podcast. I'll add it to the show notes. But the guy in the podcast compared him to Cincinnatus, the Roman emperor, who my Roman history is a little foggy, but I believe Cincinnatus was a farmer, and he was called upon by the Republic to lead his country. So he led his country. He led the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic, and then when he was done leading, he just went back to farming. And it was kind of the same with George Washington. It was very, very eerily similar, and there hasn't been too many figures in history like that, which I think makes him extremely unique. And I think if we would have had anybody else to be our first president, I think the U.S. would look a lot different than it is. A lot of the structures that we have in place, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, would be very different than what we have today.
I think it's interesting too how he was the first and only president to not be affiliated with a political party. It was just solely based on his love for the country, that he was that he, as you mentioned, left his former life, which he could have. He was already in retirement. He just won a war to free the U.S., the newly formed republic, and then came back out of that sense of duty, which it's pretty pretty inspiring.
Yeah, it not only did he leave retirement, but he gave up all of his wealth. He actually so George Washington was a very large farm owner or plantation owner at the time. So he was very successful in that regard. He as president, he actually he was kind of a student of farming, and he actually was the first person to bring over mules, which is a cross between a horse and a donkey. And he brought those to the U.S. from Spain, I believe, due to their ability to be better farm um, kind of workhorses, essentially. So he left his farm to serve his nation, and as you know, as in the during the Revolutionary War and as president, he dumped a lot of his own money to the point where he was actually bankrupt um, into into keeping the nation afloat, to supplying the army, to keep the cause up and running during the Revolutionary War, and then he never really recovered from that. And so, just the amount of sacrifice he had for the country, because he felt like it was, his moral duty, his moral obligation as a citizen to serve his people. And I think that's why he, when we look at especially his campaigns in the Revolutionary War, I mean, he was appointed general, and he had a ragtag army, basically of just a bunch of different militias that were kind of from different colonies that were thrown together, and not well equipped, no real military training, and most of these men, and he was able to rally his men even in the worst of conditions, to inspire them, and just to you know encourage them, and fight alongside them to keep fighting. I think it's just that, like, very personable. I think he was a person who was very relatable. I think had the same goals that the people had, and that inspired a lot of people to follow him.
Yeah, I was really interested in listening to those videos you sent to me, Aiden, because for us, and just like his resoluteness, especially in like Valley Forge and those other areas where it didn't look like there was anything to hope for, but he was so like perseverant that he inspired all those other troops to stay with him. Like, I think they had the least amount of deserters during the Valley Forge as well.
Yeah. So the conditions
One of the
became.
talks, like,
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
well, keep going. Yeah,
I
I
was just.
just I understood a little bit.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, at that time, during Valley Forge, it was one of the harshest winters, during the Revolutionary War, and actually of that time. And so, even though the conditions were actually the worst they had been in the entire war, he had the least amount of deserters during that time, which is pretty impressive. Um, and he was known to get pretty upset when people deserted, or when people didn't take when his men didn't take the revolution as seriously as he did. You know, he really believed in it, and I think that's probably why so many people stuck with it. The people that really believed in the cause, um, they looked at him as one of them, as somebody that they would die alongside, if it came down to that, because he truly believed in, and he was there for that reason and that reason alone, not to posture himself in some political way, or try to gain more power, but it was true, genuine um, dedication to his country. which I think is one of the reasons he probably will go down as the greatest, at least American general of all time, if not the greatest. Not only a leader of his country, but a leader in the military as well. I think that his moral resolution was incredible, and that's not something you see anymore, really.
Yeah, you could say that Washington stuck to his guns.
He did. He stuck to his guns. Yeah. But I mean, I think some of the cool things that I never really thought about before that, I learned over the course of this past week is some of the legacy Washington left behind. Like, obviously, he's the first president, great leader during the Revolutionary War, after, but he really was a firm believer in the Constitution, and he believed in the literal following of the Constitution. And so he didn't like I think he said that we should follow the Constitution literally, and if amendments were needed, they could be presented, but there was a reason that we had the Constitution and we should stick to it, which I thought was pretty cool. He was pretty firm in that resolution to uphold the Constitution, even though there were a lot of people at the time that wanted to change it immediately, do away with some of the things, and so I thought that was really neat. But I never thought about this before. We kind of take the two-term presidency thing for granted. Washington could have served his entire life as president. There was no law, there was no precedent at the time for a president to only serve 2 terms. Yet he did. He stepped down when he felt like his time was up and he needed to pass on the torch to somebody else. And so because of his humility, I think, is why we have the 2-term presidency precedent and why it's become a thing. And who knows what America would have turned into if that was not the case. Because we could have, you just think about some of these other countries that have a singular leader and they can serve as many terms as they want. And you kind of look at the state of their country, and a lot of them have become dictatorships. And so I wonder if what our history would look like if that was not established because of his humility.
Yeah, and it's like, given his financial struggles, personally, it would have been much more convenient for him to stay in office as long as possible. I'm sure that was a lot more comfortable than having to go back to his plantation and actually managing really a failing operation.
Yeah, one would assume. He didn't even want to be paid for being the president. Actually, he wanted to refuse his salary, but they kind of forced that upon him. So I thought that was interesting too. That he wasn't. This wasn't just, like I said, he wasn't posturing to hold on to his power. This wasn't a power grab. This was something true and genuine. In that he wanted to, this was all about serving his nation, nothing more, nothing less. And when he felt like he couldn't serve his nation as well as other people could as president, he gave it up. So I think that's like one of the most admirable qualities of Washington is his sense of duty towards his country and realizing when his ability to serve fell short of those around him, and to put those people into the places they needed to be when they were more equipped to do the job. You look at all the career politicians today and you wish, wow, if only we could have like a handful of Washingtons, right? Like give us like 5 of them and we'll be happy.
That's true, yeah. I mean, it's quite the inspiration, especially in like understanding his own value to the country and then being willing to put that out. And then so many people followed him because he took the heroic step of saying, oh, this is what I can offer, and I will offer as much as I can. And then from that decision and example, we had so many other patriots come with him and follow him because they understood that what he was doing was the right thing because he believed in the cause. And we can see today, like, what that determination brought so many millions of people since him. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, I just think, yeah, I guess I've been thinking for the last week of like what, and it's probably an exercise that is all in vain. But like, what would the U.S. look like without Washington, and what would it look like if we had more Washingtons? And I don't think you can look at it either way, obviously, because you spend too much time thinking about the what ifs. But either way, I think without Washington, we'd be in probably a much different place as a country. Because I don't think. I mean, what are you guys' thoughts? Do you think we would have stuck with kind of our founding principles, I mean, the principles stated in the Declaration, kind of codified in the Bill of Rights and all that stuff? Do you think we would have stuck by that without having those like first 8 years of an incredible leader like that, a person as influential as Washington, or do you think we would have? Yeah, I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts?
I guess I just think about how divided even some of the founding fathers were. I know I listen as well to that podcast that you've kind of referenced throughout the show, Aiden, and the narrator made mention of how you had Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton that were essentially like the modern day versions of a Democrat, being Jefferson, and the Republican Hamilton. He was known as a Federalist back then. But like how they kind of were united under Washington as when he was president, I feel like that was probably influential in providing, at least for the first 8 years of the republic, of the new republic. That was probably, I would think, just speculating, I would think that was crucial in establishing the system we have today and having I guess forcing the two different sides of the political aisle to come together. So I would say in that regard, it probably would look a lot different.
Yeah.
But again, it's hard to
speculate. It's hard to speculate. No, I think you're right though. I think like that's something that I recognize too. And we should say, I pulled up the name of the podcast just so we give credit where credit's due. It was the History Unplugged podcast. It was their episode from July 30th, 2019, George Washington as man, general, leader, and mule pioneer. So it was really interesting. The guy that hosts it, I wish I knew his name. I don't remember it off the top of my head. Excellent. I would highly recommend listening to it. It starts with Washington's early life and takes you all the way to his death. So it was really informative. But yeah, back to what you're saying, Jake. I think that ability to, I think the ability Washington had to be unbiased in the political kind of the political party sphere was something special. And maybe it was his pure feeling of duty to serve his country in the best way possible. But you could almost sense that Washington tried to take the most unbiased approaches as possible. He didn't let anything cloud his judgment when it came to making decisions on how the U.S. should be run. He didn't have his own personal agenda to push. It was purely, I think it was pretty pure in the sense that he was just trying to do what he thought was best for the country, or what was best. Not, I guess maybe not what he thought was best for the country, but what was actually best for the country. Because I don't think he was trying to push any sort of agenda that or pre-notions that he had. I think he was just trying to be a leader to a nation that needed a leader. So I think that unbiased approach is something that we don't even see in our greatest leaders today. I think even the ones that try to walk the middle of the aisle still have a pretty biased opinion on how certain things should be run. And that's not to say he lost sight of morality in any way. I mean, the pillars of morality he pretty strongly upheld. I was actually reading that book about Reagan, and Reagan actually talked about Washington, and he said that George Washington believed that religion, morality, and brotherhood were the pillars of society. And he said that you couldn't have morality without religion. And so Washington wasn't a religious man by any means. He wasn't that religious, but he believed that there was obviously things there were structures that either create a good society or a bad society. And so for him, religion, morality, and brotherhood were those pillars of society. And I think that's kind of how he led the country. He just looked at, does this follow those pillars? And if it doesn't, then maybe we should reevaluate things a little bit. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, speaking of his sense of morality, I also found it interesting to read that he was actually very well versed in abolitionism. So the ending of slavery was something that he actually looked forward to and would have liked to implement. But at the same time, he kind of foresaw the circumstances that would lead up to the Civil War, in that he felt like it would be too great of a, well, not step forward, but like too great of a change that it would induce more harm than good, and cause an all-out division in the country when it was just getting started. So I thought that was interesting to note, because you always hear the rumors going around about how he owned thousands of slaves or was a plantation owner for 50 years. But in reality, he actually freed all his slaves on his deathbed. And he never bought or sold any either. He saw it as immoral to be breaking up families and selling people as objects. So I thought that was worth noting.
Yeah, I find that very fascinating. That whole, so there's so many criticisms obviously of the founding fathers in that time period, where you've got these leaders that were in many ways such great figures of freedom, of morality, and all these things, and at the same time they owned slaves. But I think, like you said, for Washington, he obviously he obviously said that he wanted to do away with slavery, but or saw that slave. I think what he said actually was that slavery. He saw the inevitable end of slavery, and he thought it would die off. And I think he thought it would die off much sooner than it actually did. I think that the the industrialization of farming kind of in the South, especially, kind of kept slavery alive for a longer than Washington.
Yeah, it took off. It took off again. I remember
Hmm.
after his death, some
Hmm.
20, 30 years after that, and then
Yeah.
hit its peak
Hmm.
in that from that decade leading up to the Civil War.
Yeah. So
So
I
it was like a dying institution at the time, at
yeah,
the time that he
exactly.
was
And
alive.
I think yeah, and I think that's maybe why he didn't push harder. I think if Washington would have been around during the time of Lincoln and the Civil War, I think he probably would have taken a much different approach to slavery. But I think just kind of looking at the time, slavery was a dying institution, and that wasn't. I mean, he was. They had just done this great thing. They had emancipated themselves from the the largest country on earth, being Great Britain. They just emancipated themselves from the king, right? So it wasn't a hill he was going to go die on. It wasn't something he was going to break up the country over immediately because he felt like it was going to die off anyway, uh, pretty quickly. So I think it's one of those like moral dilemmas you get in. It's like, but it was also a different time too. So it's it's something we can look back on as like it's a part of history. But I think the reasons are much deeper than it was just the time he he was like everybody else and he owned slaves. I think that's kind of the response most people take when addressing a lot of the founding fathers and their slave ownership is it's just the time. And why that's part of it. I feel like especially with Washington there's more factors than just the common response.
Yeah, it was really interesting listening to that part of the podcast and how he referenced what you had mentioned, Jake, how he didn't want to break up families and he didn't want to be a part of a slave trade. So he was almost like making sure his slaves were okay and that they had good lives. And then if they wanted to be free, they could, but they could stay on if they wanted to stay with him. So he gave them like the choice of like where would they like to be. And I thought it was incredible just to realize how successful he was as like a farmer. Because let me know if I got this right, but I thought he said that Washington had about 50,000 acres under his name. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I believe that. I believe that was the number, which is crazy. I mean,
That's like
50,000 acres.
huge.
Yeah, I mean, you think about that in current day. I mean, in current day terms, that's an insane amount of land.
Yeah, especially like Virginia land. That's like heavily forested and thick land. So I was I was amazed at like how he came back in like those 2 short years after he'd been gone for so long. He pretty much got his plantation to where it was very profitable, considerably profitable, and he yeah just understood like business, like how trade worked and things like that, which I thought probably had a lot to do with why he was so attentive during his presidency. Because there was something else he said that he like one of his highest morals was making sure he kept his word and other people kept their word to him. Like how he said that they said that the guy sorry of the podcast he mentioned that Washington would demand the exact payment for what he was told to be given. So if a guy did a deal and the guy was short or over, Washington would be like, no, this is what you said you're going to do. This is what we're going to do. So that was pretty interesting. I don't know. What do you guys think about that part of it?
Yeah, I think he was a man of his word. I think it came from. I think he had a certain. I think if I think there was a certain amount of intensity to him, and he held himself to a certain standard, and he expected those around him to also, hold themselves to a high standard. And I don't know if that's something that was just he was born with, or if it was kind of learned. But it seemed like he was a very yeah, intense. I think he had a certain amount of intensity to him, and I think that's probably one of the reasons he was. I think it probably also a good military leader as well. Uh, that intensity, that drive, that focus.
Yeah, uh, yeah, like that demeanor. How he was, except that one time they said that he was like extremely like resolute. Like they said you could pick him out in 10,000 men. He's like someone who's understood his presence. I thought that was pretty cool. And it was kind of fun to hear that he was a big boy. It's like a good old Southern boy, like 180, 190, 200 pounds, 6'2", big guy.
Yeah, for the time that was massive. I mean, there wasn't that many tall people around back then, so it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
that is pretty cool.
Yeah. But the last kind of thought I had, or takeaway, I should say, takeaway I had on Washington, I thought this was really cool too. I mean, for the most part, I mean, he was educated. He had a pretty high education in today's standards. He was actually taught by his father and his brother, I believe. Is that right? I think that's what the podcast said for the most part. But then he was late, after kind of just the general schooling, he was mostly self-educated, and he kind of had this lifelong dedication to learning in his free time and learning and reading up on topics that he found to be useful, whether it was military strategy or farming, all these different things. So I thought it was really interesting to look at his success in both farming and being a leader and leading an army, and seeing that those were things that he had true, I think, interest and passion in, and he spent the time, he dedicated the time to learning and educating himself on those things. And I think that's a great takeaway for anybody that wants to be successful at anything, is that if you truly enjoy something, if you want to be good at something, you have to put in the time and the dedication uh, to learn more about it and educate yourself on that. And so I thought, that example from Washington was pretty cool to see, um, because being the role model he is, and the great man he was for the nation, it's nice to have some practical takeaways. So I think if we wanted to be more like Washington, I think that's a good way to start.
Yeah, that really speaks to his character, I think, because that takes a high degree of self-motivation to be a self-taught person to the point where you're an actual expert in several different fields, as he was. So yeah, again, we talk about his character, his moral code. That really speaks to that.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, he seemed like a very competent individual. Like whatever he did, he was in all the way. Like he was a playful out type of guy. Um, and I think it was interesting too how it sounded like he was a man of few words, but the words he did say were extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, they said that he had to have time to think about what he wanted to say, and like how his addresses were like a paragraph long as the president. I thought that was pretty cool too. Like he just got to the point and just said it.
Yeah, I think it was like cool too. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but like how a lot of the founding fathers, their their communication skills were off the charts compared to what we have today. Um, but it was interesting to hear that he kind of had two sides to his communication. He had this very long form, eloquent form in his writing. As far as communication went, he was a better written communicator than oral communicator, but at the same time, he still found the most effective way to be an excellent oral communicator, even with the challenges he had. And I think one of the reasons he typically didn't have speeches longer than or addresses over like a paragraph is because of his teeth? Was that it? I forget why.
Yeah, I
Maybe you
think
guys remember.
he had like several dentures.
That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, yeah, made it difficult for him to articulate his thoughts.
Yeah. So I mean, just the resolve to kind of work past that impediment and still be the best communicator he could was it's pretty cool. I know his like final address to the nation as president. I think it was like I think I looked it up and it's like 17 pages long. I'll have to find it again. I don't know. I think it's on the National like archives, but I'll have to find. I've heard it's one of the most if you want like a real idea of where the country was at when Washington left office and kind of the hopes he had for the nation. I've heard it's really, really fascinating. So that's something that's on my to-do list. I didn't have enough time to actually do my own research on it this week, um, on top of everything else. But I look forward to reading that in the future and maybe talking about it a little bit more on a future episode.
That would be really interesting to talk about. I mean, he was so how to say it. He had such meaning in what he said because in school I read a few of his excerpts, like his um, inaugural address, a couple of his addresses to his troops as general, and you read them and you're like, holy smokes! Like I'm ready to pick up a musket now. It's like you're just so inspired by what he said because he understood the meaning, almost like the philosophical understanding of what good things were in reality, and he inspired others to fight for those things. Like he almost embodied the American spirit, I would say. He did definitely do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the American spirit. This might be a different way of looking at it. I think the American spirit was born from Washington, and obviously some of the other founding fathers. But I think one of the reasons, you know, we can look to Washington as a strong example of what it means to be American is because of, I mean, you can't deny his influence on the kind of the spirit of being American. I think that he played a very, very impactful role on the shaping of what it means to be an American.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely like one of the top examples people always think about when you're saying American, especially founding father, was like Washington as like the the main actor in the field of battle, and like one of the main influences, and just how things were set up by his discretion of what he thought was the most important thing. And then you had a lot of debates amongst the founding fathers, but it seems like Washington was always very resolute. He listened to a lot of the opposing sides and tried to make the best decisions, but it seemed like he was pretty unwavering in what he understood, what he thought was most important.
Yeah, I think that's something too that we can kind of in practical use take away is you shouldn't shy away from listening to other people's views on things, but you should also have the strong backing in what you believe in and uphold that, and not be afraid to defend it when necessary.
Right. He understood the value of freedom, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because another reference to that podcast, and how he was very upset with the trade happening in America with England, how they were not fulfilling their end of the bargain. They were giving in cheaper products, not being on time, increasing taxes, and these different factors. And he, even though he fought for England and he was a good loyalist, he understood that England was starting to take advantage of America, and he didn't want to see that. And that was like the beginning of a distaste for England, for sure, because it was like what we were talking about earlier. It's like there was no consenting party on America's side, so they just had to do what they were told from another country across the Atlantic Ocean before telephones. So they're like, well, this isn't going to work very well. We should have our own sovereignty. And then a lot of main figures understood the importance of that, and then America was born from those ideas.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what he would do today if he saw what was going on. He's probably, just looking down like, what the heck? He's like, you guys are a bunch of idiots. And we might need a Washington to bring us back. Who knows? Maybe he'll come from the grave. But yeah, it's really interesting to kind of research and learn about the lives of these figures that we know about, but probably don't give enough credit to where credit's due. I think Washington's just kind of become a name. We've forgotten about the person who Washington was. So I think that this past week's been a good exercise, at least for me, in just rediscovering. Okay, this was the man behind the name, and I think that's been really cool. So yeah, hopefully you guys got the same thing out of it, because it's a breath of fresh air to read about people that actually cared about their country, especially when that's kind of the goal with this podcast, is to revitalize that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the norm back then. Was that was your primary focus, God and country. And now, yeah, looking back on it, it's just so different than the prevailing attitude among politicians. It's really, really, truly remarkable.
Yeah, that's well said, Jake. The norm was God and country, and then everything followed from that. And now it's like, I don't know.
Yep,
I'm still trying to figure that out.
I think they're so directionless they don't even know where they're going or what's motivating them to continue onward. I mean, Joe's running around chasing ice cream cones and little kids, so I don't know if there's anything else in that dude's mind. Um, yeah, it seems like most of them. But well, I guess we're coming up here probably on an hour and a half, so we should probably wrap this one up. But yeah, like I said, I mean, this was at least for me, it was really great. So I hope you guys had the same type of feeling researching, and it's great to talk about this stuff. So hopefully we can keep the momentum here going. I think we're going to try to do a little mini series on the leaders in our country, or the great leaders in our country, and how they influenced us to be where we're at today, and what we can learn from each one of them, and what we can try to take away. So I don't know what our next week's podcast is, guys. Do you guys got any ideas? Got anything that's really just tugging in the back of your minds right now is sounding interesting? I'm going to tell you what. I'm wrapping up this book for Reagan right now, and we're probably going to have to do a Reagan podcast fairly soon, because if I don't get out all this information, I'm gonna lose it.
Yeah, I've read a couple Reagan books as well, so I would 100% be down to do a segment on him.
Yeah, I think so. So if you're listening to this, you want to learn more about Ronald Reagan, we've got one coming for you. We did talk about doing a follow up to each episode on famous or influential figures, with a rundown on kind of the current situation in the country. So we might discuss in the next episode the Revolutionary War. That's to be determined, so don't get your hopes up. We'll announce it, and you'll have to just wait till the next I guess, or you just have to wait till the next episode to find out. But either way, it's been good to be on talking with you guys, and hopefully everybody that's listening enjoyed this podcast. If you've got any comments for us or want to interact with us, leave a comment on YouTube. Leave us a review on Spotify. You can interact with us on Instagram, the Green Dragon Podcast. We're posting clips from all our podcasts there. So if you want to share your favorite moment of the podcast or a particular episode with a family member or a friend, you can go there and share those clips. And then you might even discover a clip that you might want to go back and listen to one of our old podcasts if you haven't. So like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next week. But first, because I'm not going to forget, be a good person, be a good American, and live your life like George Washington. Thanks.